Welcome to Regent Hall. We're in the week after Easter week here, and I'm standing in front of what has been an excellent Easter Sunday display put together by our church. And I wanted to sort of capture the essence of it before it gets dismantled through the week and the flowers get distributed and everything gets put back to normal. We're starting a new series now. It's a series based on the Lord's Prayer. We're particularly looking at Matthew's teaching, and we're looking at the perspectives, because we're not going to be breaking down the words word by word and sentence by sentence necessarily, although that will come into it, but we're looking at the picture Jesus is portraying, especially in Matthew 6, because Matthew 5 and 6 from the Beatitudes right the way through are painting pictures of a new world, of a new setting, of a new relationship. So in Matthew chapter 5, we had the Beatitudes, blessed are those. And it painted a picture that blessed are those who the world would not consider being blessed. And we get to the end of chapter 5, and we get to that point where, the world sees an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. But what I'm telling you is that this world of God is something completely different. The relationship with God comes and brings something different. And we finish off chapter 5 with Jesus' teaching in the fact that, if you can only love those and you can only forgive those who forgive you, then even the tax collectors do that. There's no righteousness in that. And then in Matthew chapter 6, he begins to paint the picture of a new world using words. And in Matthew chapter 6, before he's ever started getting to verse 9, which are the words of the Lord's Prayer, he begins to paint a very important picture. So this is what it says from verse 1. Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This, then, is how you should pray. And then we start in verse 9. So Jesus is already beginning the teaching about what it is to pray before he's ever actually said a word about what we should say in the prayers. But the attitude and the picture of where we should pray and how we should pray. He's taking them into a place where it's not in public. It's not a place where we can create a performance, but we're creating a relationship. We're creating a connection with God that is beyond anything that is about words or actions. We're doing something that is beautiful before God. And in that sense, we are offering to God a prayer that comes not because of what is written down, but because of what is written on our hearts. He starts off by saying, how you give to the needy. It's not a performance before God. We're not earning God's grace. We're not earning God's love. And yet he gives to us his presence and his power if we can understand how to approach him. Everything that God has, he is willing to give to us, as long as, in the right attitude, we're not abusing the opportunity of approaching him. And in essence, what Jesus is doing at the beginning of chapter 6 is he's providing two contrasts. He's providing the contrast of those who perform in front of God and perform in front of people, if I can use that word, without reducing it, because I think there are plenty of people who do things in public who would not see it as a performance. There are times I, as an officer, have duties to do in front of the public, words to speak, rituals to perform. I don't do it as a performance, but if I'm not careful, I perform it. But here, Jesus is saying, find a space where it's never about a performance, where it's only ever about a conversation and a connection and a relationship between you and God. Make your life something that is intimate rather than public. If we're not careful, we can reduce things to the publicness of what we do, coming to worship, what we wear, what we say, the things we take part in and the things we don't. I remember growing up that as a Salvationist, it was still, even when I was a youngster, frowned upon going to the cinema and going to football matches. It just wasn't seen as being part of being a good Salvationist. Things have changed. Some struggle with those changes, and some struggle where those changes will lead. But if we're not careful, we lose the intimacy in the questions of my ownness, my own feeling as I approach God. God gave himself, and we look upon the cross of Jesus. He was broken. He was battered. He was tormented. He was scorned. And in that beauty of that brokenness, I find that in my humanity, sometimes that I think my humanity sort of separates me from God, but my perspective is that I come from God. My humanity is created by God. And if my humanity is created by God, there must be an essence of that humanity in God for it to be created from God. It doesn't come from nowhere. He just didn't make it up. Therefore, there is my humanity in the person of God, which makes it intimate. That in those moments when Jesus is saying, find a sacred space, he's not talking about necessarily a closet. He's not necessarily talking about a room somewhere away from everywhere else. What he's talking about is somewhere where my humanity meets with God's divine humanity and is able to understand and connect with each other. Then it's not about the words. Matthew tells us he already knows what I want before I've ever said a word. He already knows what I need before I ever ask. So it's not about the content. It's about the connection. So when you pray, make sure that we're finding that connection. My humanity with God's divine humanity. And in that connection, I begin to discover what it is to be touched by God and touch my God. So I hope and pray that as we move through this series of the Lord's Prayer, that aspects and pictures that come out of the Lord's Prayer will be helpful to you as we try to develop that connection, that intimate connection with God. May God bless you.